Howdy, everybody. Thanks for being here. Feels like it's been a long time. Time's a funny thing. Finding enough of it can be a tricky thing. Um, so excuse my absence. It's been a while. Glad to be back. Um, Getting back into some Etruscan videos. I like this information in light of the kind of Atlantis overlays we discussed in the last episode, as well as the relations that we're going to start making to the Yucatan. And we're going to start kind of crossing paths with the Phoenicians through language, mythology, archaeology, and many other subjects. But remember where we let off. If you haven't seen the first episode in this series, Etruscan Origins in Atlantis, definitely worth checking out. But yeah, this one's going to be about the origins of Rome. And I just thought the language in this article is so fascinating and connects a lot of the dots with the work that I've been exploring through these old newspapers. Yeah. Let's get right into it. Time is precious. Thanks for joining me as always. This is called Professor Iroli Proves Etruscan Origin of Rome. We're going to zoom in a bit here. Okay, this is from 1903. Professor Iroli proves Etruscan origin of Rome. Legends of Eternal City must be rewritten in light of modern discovery and made to correspond to facts which spade of excavator has revealed. I mean, just incredible. Kind of the underlying theme of my channel is what lies beneath. We stand on the shoulders of giants. Civilization built on civilization built on civilization. And, what a fantastic little sentence there. Written for the Sunday Republic, Romulus was called after Rome. Rome was established on at least some of its 7 hills long before the birth of its reputed founder. Now, this theme of 7 hills, we'll get into this more when we cross the Atlantic, but it exists all over the world. It's incredibly interesting. The relation, as above, so below, and the cosmology, astrological references we'll get into more. But it's another one of those markers that shows a civilization that was connected throughout the entire globe. The legends of Rome must be rewritten in light of the modern discovery and made to correspond to the facts which the spade of the excavator has brought to light. Love that. That's again, that should be like, kind of my theme, my theme quote for my channel. That modern discovery, that history must be rewritten to correspond to the facts which the spade of the excavator has brought to light. So very powerful. The Forum, which was the center of the civic life of Rome, is now the storm center of revolutionary discoveries. Discoveries of such stubborn facts as remains of a non-Roman civilization which upset accepted theories of history and point unearningly to new theories of the beginnings of that ancient power. The work in the Forum has been going on for some years now, and the findings of the lapis nigra, the famous black stone deep under debris of ages, has startled the world with the hope that much that was new remained to be discovered. We'll get into the stone Um, Again, farther into this series, it will connect the dots between the Phoenicians and the black stone of the um, Muslims, the Etruscans, and how that connects with Mexico. And yeah, incredibly interesting subject. The lodestone, the Egyptians, another one of those markers, just like the Seven Hills, that shows the underlying fact of a worldwide civilization, and that the Tower of Babel breaking this one world power, if you want to call it that, carries a lot more weight as you dig farther into each one of these civilizations. These expectations have been realized now with the announcement on the part of Professor Iroli that in the deepest strata he has found undoubted Etruscan remains, proving absolutely the occupation of the city of Rome by the Etruscans long before the time of Romulus. We who remember our Virgil have not forgotten that memorial journey of Aeneas to Dido, the beauteous queen of Carthage, and her fertile attempt to hold the hero of the Trojan distinction from further journeying. We remember, too, how he and his comrades were wrecked on the shores of Latium, and there founded the state from which sprang the Roman power. This is the ancient tradition of the beginning of Rome. Every schoolboy has read the delight in the legend of Romulus and Remus and their wolf mother. Ancient Roman artists delighted to perpetuate the legend in stone and bronze. Remains of wall found. How stirring was the tale of the contest between the brothers and the indignant wrath of Romulus, who slew his brother for leaping over the city wall which he had built. The remains of this wall of Romulus have been found, yet this is no proof either for or against the theory. Here is the wall, but who knows whether Remus jumped over it or not? Yet in a sense, Romulus still stands as the founder of the imperial city, though there was a city on one of the hills well established generations before Romulus was born. Who founded this? The first city of Rome. Professor Airoli has a plain answer to the question in the arms, utensils, and ornaments, which are unmistakably Etruscan in shape and design. The Etruscans loom up as one of the greatest of ancient peoples, a fact that has been suspected, yet never proved, for their civilization has been almost as great as a puzzle to archaeologists as that of the ancient Hittites. It is only since 1841 that scholars have succeeded in deciphering the Etruscan script, but the literary remains are so few that we are almost completely at sea regarding the records of these people, which must, nevertheless, have been remarkable, to judge from the tombs and their contents. We do not even know whence they came, or how they originated. The father of lies, Herodotus, furnishes a legend of their origin from Lydia, which is not generally accepted because of many striking differences between their civilization and that of the Lydians. They were probably a northern race which made its way to the southward, taking many customs, superstitions, and no little wisdom with it. According to Professor Airoli, they were established on the Aventine Hill at a very remote period. Here they built their stronghold and preyed upon the surrounding peoples, first among them on account of proximity being the Sabines. When the Latins came in and in some way found lodgment in the Etruscan city of Rome, finally taking complete possession of it, they continued the war with the neighboring tribes that witness the old legend that Romulus led his men to carry off some of the Sabine women for wives. Tradition was dismissed. The Etruscan civilization lies back of the Roman civilization, has been more than suspected heretofore, but it was thought that these influences were due to contact rather than to inheritance. Leading authorities have dismissed the tradition that there was Etruscan blood in the old Roman stock, but now archaeology comes forward in support of this tradition, which we now see has something else to support it. The system of government at Rome was essentially Etruscan. The system of clients and slaves, the aristocracy, and the union of cities was Etruscan throughout. In Etruria, the kings were elected for life, but were checked more or less by the principals, or loukomos. A similar system prevailed in Rome in ancient times. Even the insignia of dignity and office were the same in Rome and Etruria. There were the purple robe of the aristocrat, very Phoenician. Again, we've talked about this before. The praetexia, the 12 lictors, and the fasces, the curule chair, and the triumphal processions. It is known that the Etruscans paid especial attention to the art of divination, and if there is anything especially characteristic of the life of early Rome, it is the custom of being guided in all important affairs by the soothsayers and haruspelli, the art of divining the future by the organs of the sacrificial animals and the observation of clouds, were both borrowed boldly from the Etruscans we know now, not by contact, but by inheritance. Observations of Livy. We are informed by certain Roman authorities, such as Livy, that the Etruscans had certain law books in which they were instructed as to the founding and consecration of public buildings and temples, the uniting of the people, and their distribution in tribes, curae and centurae, the management of the army, and in fact the regulation of affairs in peace and war. Whole volumes were devoted to the art of divination, or the ascertaining of will of the gods, from the inspection of animals of natural phenomena. These legends of the literature of Etruria are of great interest now, and they go back to the prehistoric period before the 7th century BC, and shed no light upon the ideas of the origins of the great body of Roman law, with the origination of which the Romans have been credited, perhaps too freely. With the discovery of Professor Iroli that the great Etruscan city of the Aventine was the original Rome, our interest in the Etruscan is stimulated, and we are ready to sum up the great discoveries concerning Etruscan art and civilization, which have been made chiefly within the last half century. There was a time when the Etruscan language was spoken in Rome and taught to the children there, but it was gradually forced out as too harsh for the trained Latin ear. Although our language of the tongue is confined to a few inscriptions and possibly 200 words, we still know that it was by no means a liquid or well developed as the Latin tongue soon became. And in the battle for supremacy, the fittest survived, the Etruscan being driven further and further away until it finally died out, almost yesterday in a small settlement in the Alps. Isn't that funny? The Etruscan language died in the Alps. Yeah, there's a reason for that. The Etruscan language survived strongly in Switzerland, which is incredibly interesting, especially when we start to make more correlations between the lake dwellers, the pile dwellers, the Venetians, the Phoenicians, the Atlanteans, those that dwell on the water, and why that language is so related to Central America. Yet the Etruscans are not dead. They live in tombs of great magnificence, in works of art that compare favorably in many respects with Roman art, and at times approach the art of Greece. Now, if you haven't seen the first episode of this series or seen some of my other works in correspondence to Grecian art, you'll find that Grecian art, Etruscan art, and early Chinese art are indistinguishable. Terracotta existed amongst the Greeks, the Etruscans, and of course the Chinese. But of course, some of the oldest and more advanced, again, an underlying feature among a lot of this is that things get more advanced the older they get, which is kind of the opposite of what we're told. But some of the most advanced terracotta found in the world is found in Arizona, New Mexico, Utah. And some of the oldest Grecian art is found in Alaska. And we'll get into more of the relation between Grecian art and Etruscan art. And we'll show that some of the oldest Etruscan art, the people are dressed in what you would call Chinese dress with dark skin. It's very interesting. You'll also find overlays between the Phoenician priests with their robes of crosses, but the crosses are really swastikas. How this relates to Quetzalcoatl, some of the priest kings, some of the early evidences of religion in the Americas, especially the American Southwest. It's it's the oldest symbol in the world, and there's a reason it exists among the Buddhists. Gautama Buddha, and it's the oldest symbol of Guatemala. The ruins there, yeah. The pottery is a big connection. The remains of this art have been found not only in the greatest of the Etruscan cities in Roman times, which is we talked about the last episode, about 11 miles from Rome, but in the ruins of the other 11 cities of the Etruscan Confederacy, and even in Rome itself. We talked about the Etruscan Confederacy in the last episode. Really important because those foundations seem to be a repeopling after a cataclysm in the Americas. Was Central America destroyed by some event, and the remnants of those Atlanteans found their way into the Mediterranean? Or do they all share a foundation, and they all were survivors from a previous cataclysm? Good questions to ask, and hopefully we're going to keep getting closer to identifying these questions. Art of the people. After studying these remains, we are readily now to say some of the religion, life, and art of this interesting people. They called their gods Osier. Their Jupiter was Tinia. Juno was Uni, and Minerva was Menria. They were alike, and yet unlike. The Roman deity is still controlling the affairs of men. There is a whole catalog of lesser divinities which need not be mentioned here. Their chronology goes back as far as the 10th century BC, yet they must have been far more ancient than this, for they were already civilized then and had immigrated to Rome by that time. There is a legend that certain Greek artists came to Etruria in the 7th century BC and taught the Etruscans their art. Who were the Greeks? The Greeks came to Etruria? Is Greece the second civilization of these, quote, Greek people? We have Etruscan works of art dating from a period earlier than this, as is certainly the case with the articles found by Professor Iroli down at the bottom of the forum. It has been noted by students that there are many Oriental characteristics in the art of the Etruscans, exactly, distinguishing their production sharply from those of the Greeks. Their pottery may be ruder and the figures not so well proportioned as those of the Greeks, but is so strong as original nevertheless. They worked in bronze and silver, having silver mines in their own territory, which they dug deep. And their coins were undoubtedly influenced by Greek ideas after the 5th century BC, but there remained something of their own in whatever they did. They were a powerful race, borrowing where they pleased from Greece, from Phoenicia, from Egypt, but always assimilating what they borrowed and making it their own. They were a luxurious race, fond of jewels of gold and silver, on which they lavished infinite care and artistic workmanship. There is no antique jewelry today so effective as the Etruscan, especially that dull gold, which is elaborate care for details. Carved beetles on gems. If Egyptians could make scarabs, Etruria too could carve beetles on gems and set them artistically in pins and bracelets. The jewelers were ingenious too, and made as beautiful serpent bracelets and twisted pins as the designers of our day. The Etruscan matron of high degree had metal mirrors far more beautiful in design than anything we see in our shops, and as her maidens attired, their mistress she might enjoy the study of the adventures of gods and goddesses depicted on the backs of these mirrors. Uh, This is an important, this is an important connection to remember because we'll make the oldest forms of rouge, lipstick, and eyeshadow and blush are Etruscan. And you find all of these, including the mirror, um, among the higher classes of the Yucatan. Very interesting. Obviously, the scarab beetle, a similar symbol as the swastika. It pervades all across the American Southwest through the Yucatan, and obviously, of course, up the Mississippi and even into the Nile region, obviously, where people suspect its origins to be. But the origins of this symbol are far more ancient in the Americas. The old Etruscans, hard fighters, though they were in the time of Lars Porsena, when Herodotus held the bridge against them, were still a most luxurious people, reclining at their baguettes surrounded by their women in an un-Grecian fashion, as we know well from the vases and paintings which have been found. They loved the good things of life and the beautiful things. Fighting was good in its time, but after the battle came the triumph and the banquet, the feast and the jewels for the fair dancers. Now, the origins of the Olympics, the origins of the gladiators are Etruscan. These things that we often think of as Roman are much older and were just copies or rebrands. Life was not all sternness to them, but it was aesthetic. It was joyous. There was time, too, for wine, women, and song, for the beautiful in nature and in art. Even after Etruria had lost her independence, when there was no more interest in war, the wealthy Etruscans continued the development of the aesthetic, decorating the walls of their homes with elaborate paintings and filling their houses with treasures brought from Asia Minor and from Greece, as well as with the work of the native artists. Distinctive in its arts, Etruria has left its indelible marks upon the civilization of Rome, laying the foundation for the world-embracing power. Aventine the center. Professor Airoli has been able to trace all this to its very inception, finding that the Aventine was the center and beginning of the imperial city. Thence Romulus, following the example of the Etruscans, made forays upon the neighboring Sabines, living in the nearby marshes, and when they had been conquered, he built the famous Via Sacra, the sacred way along which the priests marched with their sacrifices. Professor Airoli has found traces of an artificial lake in the Forum, dating back to the time of the early kingdom. It was immediately in front of the Rostra, from which Augustus spoke to the people after his victories. Here he stood with the prows of the captured ships hung up in the arcades of the Rostra, and Rome seemed destined to rule the world forever. It is a wonderful work indeed, accomplished by the Roman professor, the uncovering of the history of centuries as he rolls away a few feet of the earth. This is every city, all across the world. All these foundations are built on previous civilizations, and Rome is no different. It puts new life into the old Etruscans and adds interest to every pot, pan, or pin identified as theirs. When we know that they were the founders of Rome, that they made Romulus possible. Yeah. Lots of correlations to make there, obviously. Many. And I hope it's becoming a little more obvious as to what I'm alluding to here. Now, why I'm spending time kind of clarifying who the Etruscans were and why that's important, connecting the dots again across the Atlantic back to the Gulf of Mexico and the Yucatan. In the next part of this series, we're going to discuss the deciphering of the language, how that related to not only Chinese, but Finnish, phonetic Finnish, Phoenician, and what that means across the pond. Um, yeah, so we're kind of building the foundations. I plan also on covering another article. Maybe we'll do that right now. I wanted to talk about some of the right. They're talking about excavating Rome. Well, this gentleman is looking at it from a perspective of, um, excuse me, of the Etruscan, right? He's just identifying the evidence. Well, when they're doing the excavations, the tunnels and things they're finding, it's absolutely mind blowing. See if I can pull this up here. Hmm. Okay. Do-do-do-do. So let's. Apologies here. Little technical issue with the window sharing. Okay. State of Rome. This is from 1813. I was at Rome in the year 1791. The city then contained 160,000 inhabitants. The luxury in equipage and liveries was considerable. In many of the great houses, the foreigner met with a hospitable reception, and everything indicated a great and opulent capital. I entered the city this time by the same road, and instead of carriages, was met by droves of oxen, goats, wild horses, driven along by black-eyed herdsmen, armed with long pikes and muffled up in their cloaks. They looked like Tartars. The dust raised by the cattle filled the air. These herdsmen, with their charge, seek every evening within the walls a refuge from the pestiferous atmosphere of the environs. They take possession of the quarters and palaces which are abandoned to them by the population, in proportion as it diminishes and is crowded together with the unwholesome air in the center of the city. The Porta Populi, the Trans-Tiberine quarter, and those of the Quirinal and the Mountain of the Trinity are already deciphered by their inhabitants. Deserted, and the country people have settled in them. The population of Rome is reduced to 100,000 souls, and this number includes more than 40,000 vine dressers, herdsmen, and gardeners. Extensive districts of the city are transformed into villages and are occupied by rustics, driven by the insalubrity of the atmosphere for their foreman dwellers, such as, I apologize, it's cut off here, such as prodigious depopulation in a short space of 20 years is almost unprecedented. The political events of the period have doubtless contributed much to the diminution, but the principal cause must be sought in the general relation of Rome and its effects of its noxious atmosphere. The scourge is every year making fresh encroachments. The fewer the inhabitants, the greater the number of victims, and every funeral is a Vavantar courier or more. So basically, what I wanted to get from this was we're dealing with events, right, that continually show events, right, that are causing some sort of depopulation. And this is the same type of narrative that exists everywhere. And again, thinking of the Etruscans, who they were, why we're even having to sort through something to look at the correlations between these civilizations and why I started with the Atlantean narrative. Because it's kind of like this the starting point. There had to have been a root to these civilizations, and over time they dispersed. Whether or not the Tower of Babel or Noah's flood played a part, who knows? Likely these stories could just be mythology. But all these cultures carry these stories of the Babel type event, the creation of multiple languages, the dispersions of people, and the worldwide deluge. And Rome has gone through several cataclysms, um, fire, water, pestilence, as that article is describing. That article was touching more on the mosquito and yellow fever problem. This existed widely in the Americas as well in this same time period, 1600s. Even before then, the 1500s, the Spaniards, they were having to rely heavily on this bark to protect them from mosquitoes because it was wiping out, millions of people. And the indigenous there were not immune, but had developed a lot more resistances and had natural protection to these things. But why is this important? It's going to help build the picture to what I'm going to start to denote as we get into, again, the Yucatan. Not only in the imagery, the mythology, but so many correlations, right? As we cross over into the Yucatan, we're going to start to talk about Ignatius Donnelly and what he was saying about the Etruscans and their correlations, again, to not only the Finnish, but their mythology. So we're going to break down through some old newspapers, the language being deciphered. And then we're going to go through Donnelly's correlations with not just language, but their mythology. And the historical mythology of the Etruscans, it's almost like a mirror image of the Kalevala, the Finnish historical mythology. And it's so close that there's no way it's a coincidence. And I think the last article we're going to look at before we cross the pond, we're going to talk about the language being deciphered, and then we're going to go into a little bit more of Rome, unearthing of Rome. I have an article from 1888. We'll just give a quick little overview of this, kind of give you a preview of the next episode. Let me get this pulled up here. My apologies. And this is kind of a long one, but it's got some good overlays with what we just discussed here, with more kind of archaeological proofs. And so, yeah, we'll give you a little preview of the next episode here. This is Los Angeles Herald, 1888. And this is called Unearthing Rome. Some important work recently done there. A house and its frescoes, the ancient wall, Etruscan tombs, Christian art in a Roman house. Now, there are so many overlays between early Christian roots and Etruscan. And we're going to show those correlations to Quetzalcoatl, the Yucatan, what this white robed bearded man wearing a tunic or the Grecian style robe, space in the name, that's covered in the swastika, which is a Phoenician priest symbology, which existed here in America. Even the Spaniards commented that these people were much familiar with Christian mythologies and stories. And they even postulated that Quetzalcoatl was Yeshua himself. Again, these Christ-like figures these priest class of Christ-like figures that you find all over the world. Another big connection. But yeah, so we'll jump into this one, unearthing Rome, some important work again. The ancient wall, Etruscan tombs. So this wall is going to correlate again with the walls of Mexico, the Great Wall of China, and many others. But yeah, so we'll just call it there. Thank you again for being here. And yeah, hopefully you're enjoying this Etruscan series. If there's anything else you are interested in hearing me talk about the Etruscans, maybe get into some more of the art. The art is really incredible. There's some good books out there that show it's almost like you're looking at Egyptian art. And who came first? It's very interesting. You also find this scarab symbolism and artwork in America. Again, connecting, I think, to the Atlantean narrative as we discussed in the first episode. But yeah, your time is precious. Thank you for spending it with me. Hopefully, you're enjoying this series. Stay tuned for part 3 as we dive into Unearthing Rome. In that episode as well, we will show continued connections, correlations between the language of the Finnish and the language of the Etruscans. Have a wonderful day, guys. Thanks so much. Bye.